Hello, hi, and welcome. If you're new here, my name is Sarah, and this is Wicked Reading. I am so excited to finally be filming and announcing this reading challenge for you guys. I've been working on this for a few months now. It's been done, but I've been sitting on it because I didn't want to announce it until we were upon spooky season, because it is very much a spooky focused reading challenge that I created. So I was very heavily inspired by the Reddit group fantasy page. They put out a yearly bingo board for the fantasy genre, and I saw a lot of my fellow booktubers that read a lot of fantasy posting about it. So I saw it and I was like, I wish there was something like that for horror. So I went ahead and made a horror bingo board. So again, it's very much inspired by the fantasy version. So I do have the prompts as they are, but also a hard mode version of all the prompts as well. The idea of this board is to bring spooky season all year round, but I wanted it to start when most people read spooky books and horror books. But this is hopefully going to help people read horror a little bit more often, read spooky books a little bit more often. So the idea of this board is to run from October of this year until October next year. But honestly, if you started early, I'm kind of tempted to start it early, so I might have a couple September reads on my board. We'll see. Really, at the end of the day, the board is what you want it to be. This is meant to be fun and encourage people to read a little bit more horror, maybe help people expand their reading horizons, check out new authors, check out new genres, that sort of thing. So really, you can do what you want with this board. I'm gonna go for completely hard mode and fill out all 25 spots between now and this time next year, and pretty much follow the rules that I created. But again, you're not turning this in, it's not being graded, so do with it what you want to. I'm going to have the Google Doc linked down below so you can get a copy of the board, as well as the details on each prompt and all of that. I'm gonna go through each prompt individually and kind of expand a little bit on them, give some recommendations for these spots where I can. I will have my TBR video up next upload, and it's going to go up Sunday, so make sure you have your notifications on because I don't typically upload on Sundays all the time. So my TBR video for me personally is going to be coming out in the next few days, but I wanted to give you guys some recs to go off of in the spots where I can give recs, because some of those spots are a bit subjective and very dependent on the person. So let's go over the rules that I was thinking for this board. So the idea of this board is to be covered by mostly horror books. Of course, you can use other genres. Personally, I'm going to limit it to 2 to 4 spots on the board, because again, the idea of this board is to bring horror and spooky books to the whole year instead of just limiting it to spooky season. As far as what counts as horror, because horror has a bad rep of being quite elitist a lot of the times. So as long as the book is either listed as horror on like Goodreads or under Barnes & Noble or whatever, as long as it's listed under horror or thriller or suspense, you can count it. If somebody else describes it as being a horror book by word of mouth or through BookTube, whatever, count it as horror. It does not have to be a type of horror that is the most extreme, the scariest shit you've ever read. It could be a cozy horror, as long as it's kind of within the realm of horror books. Count it. I want this to be approachable for people that don't necessarily read a lot of horror as well. The board should be filled out by mostly novels. Try to limit novellas to like 2 to 3 spots. I know personally I already have a couple of novellas picked out for this. I even have a book that is under 100 pages, so I guess it might be considered more of a short story that I plan to use for the board. So use them, but maybe don't, fill out every spot with a novella. Just kind of use your best judgment. Just have the majority of the board be novels. So you absolutely can repeat books for spots unless you're doing hard mode. If you're doing hard mode, then you can only use 1 book per each spot. And in addition to that, since I don't have a designated freebie spot on the board, you can make any of the spots a freebie spot, even in hard mode, but I'm going to not do that. I'm not even going to have a freebie spot. I'm filling out the whole board, but more than welcome to still have a freebie spot and count it for hard mode. Okay, so let's go through each prompt individually, starting from the top row and the top left, and then move our way across and down and across. You get the idea. So first spot is published in 2024. So this is a book that was published in 2024. The hard mode is to just read it before the end of 2024. So I don't really have recommendations for you guys. You can check out any of my quarterly horror book release videos if you did not pay attention to horror releases this year. I have all those videos. I will have my quarter 4 video coming out in the next few weeks for the books coming out between October and December of this year that are under the horror genre. So there's that for references if you need them, but there's a lot to choose from. Also, it counts if it is a translated work that was translated to your language that you can read in 2024. So for example, the book may have originally published years ago in like Spanish, but just got published in English or whatever language you can read. If it's French, if it's German, it just got published in that language in 2024. That counts as a book published in 2024 for you. After that, we have The End Times Are Near. So this is a book that is considered apocalyptic. It can be pre-apocalyptic, post-apocalyptic, anything counts as long as it's typically described as an apocalyptic book. But for hard mode, the book must include an epilogue. So Between Two Fires by Christopher Buehlman, that's pretty much the epitome of an apocalyptic book. It's very much religiously driven apocalyptic book that has an epilogue as well, so you can count that if you want to go for hard mode. For just the normal prompt, I highly recommend The Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay, although I realize that book is not going to be for everybody. It's much more of an ambiguous, speculative, more so character study, not very like plot heavy type of apocalyptic book, but I would still count that. It doesn't have an epilogue though, so it's just for the straight prompt. I personally have not read very many apocalyptic books. I think those are the only 2 that I've read, so I'm really excited to dive into this subgenre and read a book for this prompt. After that, we have This Is Halloween. So this is a book that takes place on or around Halloween, but honestly, it could just be in the fall season. So Touch the Night by Max Booth III, that takes place in autumn. That book starts on October 22nd, so that would count. It could be a book that's very Halloween driven, like Dark Harvest by Norman Partridge. Really anything that is Halloween feel, fall feel, you can count for this. But for hard mode, the book must somehow include trick-or-treating, whether that be a character just saying the word trick-or-treating, whether it be the characters going trick-or-treating or watching kids trick-or-treat. However, trick-or-treating just must be somewhere printed in the book. It doesn't have to be like a huge element of the story. So as far as recs go for hard mode, can't really help you there because I don't really know. I personally will be reading books that I know are around Halloween and hoping that it includes trick-or-treating. If anybody knows of any books that for sure have that element to it, leave the recommendations down below. Future Sarah here. So apparently I was so excited to talk about the bingo card that I totally skipped over one of the prompts, and that is blood on the cover. So for this prompt, you must read a book that has blood on the cover. Super simple. But for the hard mode, the blood must be majority of the cover, or just a very prominent aspect to the cover. So Curse of the Reaper by Brian McCauley, you could use that for the straight prompt. There is blood spots around the book, but I probably wouldn't count that towards hard mode. The Shuddering by Anya Alburn, I would count that for hard mode. So you kind of have those 2 variations of blood. So again, just kind of like use your best judgment. So that is that prompt, and moving right along. The last one on the first row is Wood/Wilderness. So this is a book where the majority of the book takes place in a forest or wilderness setting. For hard mode, the cover must not have trees on it. There's a lot of books you can pick for this for just the straight up prompt. A lot of books that take place in the woods and the wilderness. I would say a lot of like slashers are very campy. In terms of one that works for hard mode, I know Camp Slaughter by, I can't think of the author's name right now, but I will have the book on the screen. I haven't read this one, but I'm pretty sure that that does not have any trees on the cover. I think it's just a house, so that would work. And based on the title, I'm pretty sure that that is like a camp forest setting, so that could potentially work for this spot. This year, there was a new book called Heads Will Roll by Josh Winning that does have trees on the cover. I thought it didn't, but it does at the bottom. Those bottom things are trees. I almost used that book for this prompt, and then I picked it up and I realized that that wasn't just like blood, it was trees. But that would count for the straight prompt, but again, hard mode is purposely a little bit harder. So moving down to the second row, the first prompt is honoring the classics. So this can be a book that either is considered a horror classic or is a reimagining of a horror classic. So there's a lot of Frankenstein inspired stories, one of my favorite types of stories, so there's a lot of those you can pick from. There's like A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson, and that is very much Dracula inspired, so those count as well. But if you're doing hard mode, then it must be a true classic because it has to have been originally published before 1950. It doesn't have to be the copy or the version that you're reading. That could be published whenever, but as long as the original story was published before 1950, it counts. After that, we have a translated work. So this is a horror that is translated from the author's native language. For hard mode, this book must include a translator's note. One that I highly recommend that would work for hard mode is Jawbone by Monica Ojeda. I absolutely love the story, so that would work. There is a lot of other translated works that I'm not totally sure whether they do or do not have a translator's note in them, but there's Our Share of Night by Mariana Enriquez. I would even count Earthlings by Sayaka Murata because there's some pretty horrific things that happen in that story, so I would count that. Audition by Ryu Murakami. I haven't read that one myself, but a really good contender for that. There's a lot of translated horror out there, and I know that there's like specific blogs or articles or Instagram posts that dedicate a lot of time to highlighting translated horror. So it should be really easy to find one. Whether or not it's easy to find the hard mode version, I don't know, but I do at least have one rec for that one. Oh, I should have said in the beginning of this video, my apologies, rereads count. Rereads can count for sure. The only space that I would probably recommend not counting it for is the 5-star read. It's a little bit of cheating because you kind of already know what you rated it. So I would say probably don't use it for that spot. But again, nobody's checking this for you. So it's kind of just Scout's honor. The next one is Cover Pick. So this is a book that you pretty much base completely on the cover. And for hard mode, you must not know what the synopsis is before you read it. So it is a complete cover pick at that point. Next is Reaper Read. So this is a book that revolves around themes surrounding death or grief or anything like that, where kind of like the Reaper is involved. For hard mode, death itself must be personified either as a person or just as a physical being. So for example, if you want to use Belladonna by Adeline Grace for this spot, that is a YA fantasy romance, but that would count because death is personified in that story. Another one where death is personified is Death with Interruptions by Jose Saramago. I read this a very long time ago. We're talking like in high school over a decade ago. So I don't know how well it holds up, but I do know death is personified in that book, and I really liked it at the time that I read it. While it's probably a little bit more of a lit fic versus horror, you can still count it. I do own Here Goes Nothing by Steve Holtz, I believe. That may or may not have death personified. I can't confirm because I haven't read it yet, but it sounds like it might. So there's that one as well. I don't know if that's super horror or a little bit more of that lit fic as well. But like I said, it doesn't have to be strictly all horror on this board. And then for just the straight up prompt, there's a lot of grief-based books out there, a lot of books revolving around death. Just because a character dies in a book, I wouldn't necessarily count it for this. But again, do what you want. Nobody's grading it. But yeah, it should probably be more of like a theme around death and the grieving process and stuff like that. But I also don't want to force people to read something that they hate, so do what you want. The last prompt of the second row is title has a spooky word. So this is a book where the title has a spooky word. Ghost, grave, haunted, literally anything that you would consider spooky counts in this case. For the hard mode, it must include 2 or more spooky words. So you could do Curse of the Reaper by Brian McCauley. I would say Curse and Reaper are both spooky words. There's the Southern Book Club's Guide to whatever, Slaying and Vampires, I would count that. So there are a lot of options with that prompt. Moving down to the third row, the first one is Dead Man Walking. So this is a book that follows either reanimated corpses or straight up zombies. So there's a lot of options with this one as well. For the straight up prompt, there's A Botanical Daughter by Noah Medlock. There's pretty much, well, probably any Frankenstein inspired story would probably count for this. I would also even count Maggots Screaming by Max Booth III. It's like a very different, unique take on the idea, I guess, of a reanimated corpse. If you've read the book, you know what I mean. It's very different, but I would still count that for this space, honestly, so you're good there. There's All the Dead Lie Down by Kyrie McCauley. That is a YA book, but for hard mode, the book must be part of a series. So I haven't read too many zombie books, but one that I have read that would count for hard mode is Warm Bodies by Isaac Marion. That is part of a series. I'm pretty sure that there's a prequel and a sequel for that, so There's that one. I know that Myra Grant might have a few, but I haven't read too many that are actually in a series, so I don't have as many recommendations for that one. After that, we have genre bending. So this is a book that ties horror in with another genre, and for hard mode, it must be tying in a genre that you don't typically read. So if you don't typically read horror, you can have that count for hard mode. For me, I definitely don't typically read like horror crime or horror romance, so I'll probably go more of that route. Some recommendations that I would classify as horror bending are Bunny by Mona Awad. This I feel like is a very like literary horror. I would count that. You have my blessing to count that. I would also count The Devil Takes You Home by Gambino Iglesias. That's very much like a horror crime story, so you could count that. Whether or not it counts for hard mode for you is obviously very individualized, but I would count that as a genre bending book. Another one I would count is Intercepts by TJ Payne. That is a horror, but it almost has kind of like sci-fi-esque elements, a little bit of maybe crime. It's very different. I feel like it's very unique, and it definitely has like a element outside of just horror going on there, so I would count that. After that, we have a 5-star read. So obviously this is one you can't necessarily plan ahead for. You just have to kind of take it as it comes. But for hard mode, it has to be a book that you predicted would be 5 stars. It could be something as simple as, I've given this author 5 stars before, so I think this one might be it, or I really like the title, so this one might be a 5 stars. What you predict to be a 5-star can be very much stretched. Honestly, this would probably be a really good freebie spot for people who might not give out many 5 stars. After that, we have BIPOC author. So this is a book that is written by a BIPOC author, and for hard mode, it must be an author that you haven't read from before, so hopefully you find a new favorite. Some really great recommendations are The Salt Grows Heavy by Cassandra Khaw, or you can read anything by Cassandra Khaw. The Devil in Silver by Victor LaValle, or again, anything by Victor LaValle. Another one I absolutely love is My Heart is a Chainsaw by Stephen Graham Jones, but again, you can read anything by Stephen Graham Jones. Oh, there's even The Spite House by Johnny Compton. That was a really fun read. He recently also had a new book come out, so Johnny Compton is a possibility. So I'm really excited for this because I can't wait to check out some new authors. So there's a lot of possibilities for this spot. After that, we have Cryptid. So this is a book that revolves around a cryptid creature. So it could be Bigfoot, Mothman, a unicorn, Loch Ness Monster, anything that's considered like a cryptid creature can count for this. For hard mode though, you must have not known about the creature or the lore of the creature before reading the book. Moving on down to the 4th row, the first prompt is title has a number. So this is a book where the title includes a number, but for hard mode, the title must either include 2 numbers or a number and a quantifying word of some sort, like half, midnight, mile, anything that is kind of like a measurable quantifying word. When I was creating this prompt, as far as like 2 numbers go, I kind of meant 2 separate numbers, like 1922 by Stephen King. To me, that's 1 number, even though there's, 4 numbers in that number. That's in my head just 1 number, versus like Nosferatu. I would count that as 2 numbers because they are separated by a letter, but there are some other options. This one is honestly quite a bit harder in hard mode, so I expanded it to include the quantifying word because I found some other examples. I haven't read any of these, but to help you guys out, there is 4 Past Midnight, which is a Stephen King short story collection, so I did find that one for hard mode at least. But yeah, this hard mode's a little bit harder, to be honest. So again, if you've got recommendations, leave them down below. But for just the straight up prompt, there's Episode 13 by Craig DeLuey. I really enjoyed that one. You could even use Between Two Fires Here again by Christopher Buehlman. There's 12 Nights at Rotter House, which I haven't read, which I actually do have physically, but I'm not using it because it doesn't count for hard mode, but there's some examples. Next up, we have Satanic Panic. So this is pretty much just for any book that has any type of occult elements to it. Obviously, we kind of tend to think a lot about Satanic Panic with the occult, but a lot of things count as the occult. Even aliens count for the occult. Anything that is very mysterious. I think even witches count as the occult. I left a reference linked for this prompt because I feel like the occult, people tend to get stuck very much into like the devil and Satanism, which is very fair. That's a fine thing to include, but just know that it is more than that. So I included a reference, so in case you want to read something outside of that, there is that. For hard mode, the book must include some type of physical item that is considered occult, so like a Ouija board, tarot cards, anything like that. The list also includes items within it, not just, I think it's just a list of words that are like occult words, but I think some items are in there. So reference that. But one that I've read that would count for hard mode is Goddess of Filth by V. Castro. The book actually opens up with the group of girls using a Ouija board, so that would count for hard mode. The next block is book club pick. So this is the only one that doesn't have a hard mode version because I feel like book club pick can be hard enough on its own. For me personally, until I started my own book club, I was really bad at participating in book clubs. So I decided to just leave this one as is because if you are like me, that is already a hard enough prompt to fulfill. So I kept this one just as it is. So just accomplishing it counts. If you're looking for a new book club, I do have a book club for my top tier on my Patreon. It's the Bunny Book Club. We read a lot of unhinged women or books that lean into womanhood and horror. So if you need a book club, there is that, but any book club counts. Your local library, anybody on BookTube, there's a ton of book clubs to choose from. So anything from those count. Speaking of my Bunny Book Club, the next pick is pink horror, which is definitely something I lean a lot into. This is a particular genre that I have a lot of recommendations for. I love pink horror, so this is a book that pretty much just has themes that involve womanhood or girlhood. And there's a lot of books that can fit in this. For hard mode though, the book must be a debut novel. So you can count books like Natural Beauty by Ling Ling Huang. That's a debut, and that deals a lot with the beauty industry and standards that women face, so that counts for pink horror. Again, you can use Jawbone in this spot, but that's not a debut, so that doesn't count for hard mode. But there's The Eyes Are the Best Part by Monica Kim. That's very much a coming of rage type of story that would count for hard mode as well. There's Mary by Nat Cassidy. That isn't a debut, but also a very good book that deals with a older woman and the issues that older women face. Another one for hard mode is Chlorine by Jade Song. That one is one of my favorites of this year, so that counts too. So I got a lot of recommendations for this one. If you need more, just let me know. The last prompt of this row is multiple POV. So this is a book that has multiple POV. It just has to be 2 or more POVs, but for hard mode, it must also include dual timelines. So for recommendations, I would recommend How Can I Help You by Laura Sims for just the straight up prompt. That is technically considered and listed as thriller, but again, you can count thriller. So we do have multiple POVs in that book. Another one that also has dual timelines that I would count for hard mode is The Spite House by Johnny Compton. We get flashbacks of stuff that like happened in the past. So that's all it really needs is like flashbacks. It doesn't have to be like jumping every chapter, going back and forth. It doesn't have to be like a huge difference of timeline, like 1800 and 2025. It can be like a difference of 10 years or whatever. It doesn't have to be a super drastic time jump, but as long as you are visiting multiple timelines, multiple moments of history, it counts. And down to the very last row, the first prompt is as seen on the big screen. So this is any book that has a movie adaptation to it. You can also even count novelizations in this where it was first a movie and then it became a book. That's okay too. I'm not big on novelizations myself, but you can absolutely count that for this spot. But for hard mode, you must have not seen the movie or the TV series before reading the book. So this again is very individualized on what books and movies you've read and watched, but obviously a lot of Stephen King's early works have movie adaptations. My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix recently had a movie adaptation. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of movie adaptations between now and next year, so the possibilities might open up even more for you. Exorcist, a lot of classic horrors I feel like definitely have movie adaptations, but this is one that's very easily searchable. After that, we have Out of Your Comfort Zone. So this is a book that is in a subgenre that you don't typically read. So for me, it'd be cosmic horror, but it could be haunted house for you. It could be camping horror. There's a lot of horror subgenres. So as long as it's a subgenre you don't typically read, you can count it. but for hard mode, it must be by an author that you have read from before. And for this, pseudonyms count because I know there's a lot of authors that will write in one name depending on the genre and write in a different name for a different genre, which I love when they do that because then you know what to expect if they write a large variety of genres, but that counts. So if you've read a Seanan McGuire and now you want to read a Mira Grant book, those are both written under the same author, technically just pseudonym, pen name, and that would count. After that, we have short story collection. So this is a book that is a short story collection, pretty self-explanatory, but for hard mode, it must be over 12 stories. So I don't read a lot of short story collections. That's something I'm working on, but Human Monsters, an anthology, that's a very good one that would count for hard mode. I know Bora Chung has a lot of short story collections that I don't think would count for hard mode because I think most of their collections are under 12 stories, but that is an option if you're just going for the straight prompt. Next is TBR Vet. So this is a book that has been on your TBR for a very long time. For hard mode, I made it where it has to have been on your TBR for at least 2 years, or one of the oldest books on your TBR. I wanted to make it a little bit more open for people who may have recently started reading, but if you're somebody like me who has now been reading for a good minute, you're gonna get the push to finally pick up those books that you keep avoiding. And the very last spot is Creepy Crawlies. So this is a book that has a creepy crawly in it. So it could be spiders, snakes, worms. If birds are creepy crawlies to you, it could be a book with birds. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a bug, but anything that is kind of like creepy crawly to you, an animal that just makes you shiver, it counts. For hard mode, imagery of them must also be on the cover. So if you're reading a book with snakes, there's got to be a snake on the cover to count it for hard mode. I personally have not read very many creepy crawly books, but it's something I want to read more of because I've recently realized that maggot scenes are very effective for me. Oh, you know what? Speaking of, I already brought it up, but Maggots Screaming by Max Boot III, that has maggots in the story, and there's a couple of maggots on the cover. They're very hard to see, but they're there, so I would count that if you wanted to count that one. The story doesn't have to be just about the creepy crawly. It could just be like a scene in that book. So that is all of the prompts that I created for this year's horror bingo board. I'm so excited to get started on this. I really hope you guys are going to participate and enjoy this reading challenge. It's super open for the public, but if you join my Patreon, I will have a channel dedicated to the reading challenge. So we'll be able to discuss the prompts and share our TBRs and all of that, but you absolutely do not have to join for that. But if you share anything on Instagram or if you make a TBR, I would love to know. I'd love to see what you guys are doing with it, or you could just share your TBR or ideas in the comments down below. I'm hoping that the board pairs very well with any upcoming readathons, any horror-focused readathons or Halloween-focused readathons. I'm sure there's going to be a bunch coming up in the next month, so this will pair very nicely with any of the readathons you're partaking in. And I can't wait to start filling out my board. So I will again have my personal TBR video going up in the next few days on Sunday, so stick around for that. But that is everything for this video. If you made it to this point in the video and want to let me know and have nothing else to say, you can leave me a spider web emoji down below so that I know. As always, thank you so much for spending some of your time with me while I sit down and talk about books and my new reading challenge. If you haven't yet, please give the video a like, subscribe for future content, turn on the bell notification, all the fun YouTube things that help your girl out, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Bye!